Shalom everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Hebrew in Israel Haftarah series. I'm your host, Yoel Halevi, and we are now in the Haftarah of Ki Tavo, kind of drawing to near the end of the book of Deuteronomy. And this is one Haftarah before the last one, before the seventh. So this is the sixth Haftarah of Nechama, the seventh being the one for Nitzavim, and also is a special one for me, particularly because it's also my bar mitzvah reading. So as I promised, there will be something a little special connected to that and a bit of a story regarding my bar mitzvah as well. But right now we are in chapter 60, and we are continuing a lot of the ideas that we've seen before. There are some very, very interesting elements in this reading, and there are many references to things from the ancient Near East, and there are also very interesting uses of words in this particular reading because they reflect a very module way of using words in Hebrew. So I have to first of all talk about the first thing and then the second thing, and then we can go into the reading itself. The first item is the subject of the references to the ancient Near East. Now, I've spoken about this before in the series as well, also in other places in the past, where we have to be a little careful with what we use from the ancient Near East. We can discover a lot of interesting things from the ancient Near East. Back in the 1800s, what we call biblical archaeology started, and people were very, very excited trying to find evidence of the Bible and trying to prove things in the Bible from an historical and archaeological perspective. And that went on for close to 100 years, I would say, maybe more around the area of 80 years, more or less. And by the 50s, we have a flip, a change in the attitude, a change that went on that still echoes to this very day, not even echoes, still has a very strong presence, which is how to really understand what we found in the ancient Near East and how it really does reflect on the Bible. And for a very long time, people thought we're finding all the evidence that we need. But by the 1950s, what came up were other methods of research, which brought some archaeologists and some historians and Bible scholars to kind of dismiss the Bible. And this really, one of the pivotal points of this change is the work Kathleen Canyon did in the city of Jericho. She dismissed the work that was done before her in the 1800s, and then later on in the early 1900s, she dismissed it. But it was actually later on in the 80s and 90s, it was discovered that she made a lot of fundamental mistakes. However, this has strongly affected the way people understand the ancient Near East and its reference to the Bible, to a point where a lot of people talk about this idea that people were stealing from other cultures and so on. That's actually historically inaccurate. It's like saying the fact that you can find Coca-Cola in the Middle East means that someone was stealing from American culture. It's not true. Cultures shared and still do share principles, and therefore finding elements inside the Bible, finding things in the land of Israel in relation to the Israelites and the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and using material from the ancient Near East to explain these findings doesn't mean people were stealing from one another. It means that they were sharing certain elements of culture. So when we reference things which appear in the Bible to items which can be discovered in the ancient Near East, it's only because they're using known terminology. The same way that we all use things as references, because things don't exist in a bubble. There's no bubble around anything. For a very long time, the Jewish world tried to present itself as if it lived in a bubble. And to this very day, we still have a lot of people inside, for example, ultra-Orthodoxy, who try to isolate themselves from everything else, especially the children no less, but the adults are at one point have to be exposed to these things. The same way, for example, the Amish in America, they don't necessarily know everything that goes on in the bigger world, but they are very aware of it, and they're so aware of it that they actually have a practice that allows younger people to go out for 2 years to kind of learn about the bigger world and make a decision if they want to remain in the community or not. But we need to understand that even if you try to isolate yourself, unless you're living in the Amazon, the middle of nowhere, you really can't escape anything. And the Israelites did not live in the Amazon, in a jungle, and exist basically still in the Stone Age. No, the Israelites actually lived on the bridge connecting Africa. Africa is really a Roman name, but connecting the peninsula of Africa, not peninsula, sorry, the Arabian Peninsula, Africa, and the north, Mesopotamia, the Levant, all together. This was the bridge connecting everything together. So there's no way on earth that the Israelites wouldn't know about these things. One of the most interesting discoveries is that in the city of Chatzor, around the Middle Bronze Age, where areas which are considered to be Middle Bronze Age were discovered the Epic of Gilgamesh, which means literature, Mesopotamian literature was known in this region. And therefore, for a prophet or for someone to use a reference that relates to things from Mesopotamia, from the other cultures, is not unusual, is not surprising at all, because they still lived this culture, they lived this language, and things were related to one another. Therefore, it is incorrect to dismiss the ancient Near East from studying the Bible, but it's also incorrect to overemphasize what this all means. All it does is it gives us a cultural reference. So when we talk about these things, you have to also remember that the Israelites still had their own world and their own principles of understanding. Some of it sometimes is actually very surprising. So for example, I just finished the book by Richard Hess. I referenced his work a couple of times the last couple of weeks, and one of the interesting things that he points out, and I think I mentioned this earlier as well in a previous recording, it's very interesting how the Israelites, for example, would adopt sometimes things from the other cultures, but give it its own form, its own style. And what we discover is that the Israelites sometimes would take an idol, but then represent it a little differently by removing, for example, the genitalia first. So you have certain items which are considered to be fertility goddesses, but the non-Israelite version had genitalia, while the Israelite version does not have it, which means the Israelites had much more sensitivity towards such things. And it's very interesting when you think about the Song of Songs. He describes the groom, he describes the bride, but he completely avoids certain parts of the body. Instead of going into the fertility part where he talks about private parts, it really kind of just stops at one point. With the man, it goes down to the hip and all the way to the knees and even the thighs, but never really goes to the center. And with the bride, it really stops at the belly button and stops at the knee, which is a very interesting thing. But it does give us an indication that the Israelites were much more sensitive about these types of things. It was very shameful to talk about these things. The other subject that we have is the usage of words. This text does have a few occurrences where the precise meaning of a word appears really based on its context. One of the most difficult things that I have to deal with when I teach Hebrew, if I have students who have read material outside of what I would call professional work, a lot of students come up with these opinions that they hear about the usage of a root, and each consonant has a really precise meaning, and therefore when you read a word, you have to isolate each one of the consonants and read it through some pictographic idea, and therefore that's how you discover the original meaning. First of all, I would say something very, very simple. Hebrew is not hieroglyphs. It doesn't work that way. Even hieroglyphs, and I apologize if I mispronounce the word, so it's one of those words I have difficulty pronouncing, don't work that way either. And I've mentioned this, for example, in a podcast that I did with my friend Ryan White. We spoke about this. And it doesn't work that way. The way Hebrew words work is you have a root, but the root itself, as usually taught, and you can actually find there's a paper by Dr. Tamar, I think she pronounces his family name Tzvi, but which writes in English it's Zewi or something like that. So I need to ask her again I need to ask her personally how she pronounces her name. But she happens to be a professor of linguistics in the Haifa University, my university these days. And she wrote an article for a publication known as the Brill publication from Copenhagen, and they have a 4-volume series about Hebrew. Very expensive series. Don't even try to look it up. It's over 1,000 euros. I actually looked at it, but she happened to write several articles for this publication. She has a really interesting article that deals with how roots work, and she says one very simple thing. So it's not even coming from me. It's coming from someone who's a professor of this field, and she says a root is a morphem. It has no specific meaning until you put your vowel points in and until you have a context. A morphem is a term that we use for the theoretical possible pronunciations of a consonant, if you're talking about consonants, or the theoretical possibility of a pronunciation of a root. But what this means is that it doesn't really have any precise meaning until you put it into its form. Therefore, when people talk about what a word might mean, a word really derives its meaning through context. It's not like in English, for example, where you have words, and if you have words that sound the same, synonyms that sound the same, so then you need context. Hebrew is not exactly that same way, but it's in that direction, where you need it in a sentence. You need it to have context. It needs to have its vowel points placed to actually have meaning. And this really creates a reality where just having a root is never really enough. And there are several examples in this specific reading, which is chapter 60 in the book of Isaiah. Really, all 7 prophecies are from the book of Isaiah. By the way, I noticed that while reading all of these side by side, I noticed that the way some of these prophecies are linked to one another is by a key word. So in the previous prophecy, the previous reading, we had the word ketzef, which is the foam on the water and the foaming of the mouth through anger. This prophecy uses the word ketzef as well. Then later on it uses the word, or uses inside it, the word sos, or the root sos, which relates to the last reading, which opens with sos asis. So there's actually a very interesting link between all these prophecies, and they weren't randomly picked, but it's really important to point out that all these prophecies from chapter 40 all the way to chapter 66, I think it is, they're all linked to one another in some way. Or even if you say isolate the last couple of chapters, you go from chapter 60, isolate 64 and 65 and 66, or 65 and 66, and they say they're from someone else. From chapter 40 all the way to almost the end of the book, there's always a link. There are principles that link themselves to one another. And in truth, scholars have noticed, and you can do it by yourself as well, that you can actually see some connections between, say, for example, chapter 49 and our chapter 60, in ideas of Jerusalem lifts her eyes, she sees everyone gathering to her, all her sons are coming from a distance. So there are some links between these different things. Now, our prophecy is again about Jerusalem. Most of these prophecies are about Jerusalem because Jerusalem becomes the flag of everything. After Jerusalem was saved during the times of King Hezekiah, it solidified the ideology of Jerusalem. It solidified in the eyes of everyone that Jerusalem was the last haven, the last place that wasn't conquered. And this is why many of these prophecies focus on Jerusalem, because the same way everything narrowed down all the way to Jerusalem, Jerusalem was the last stronghold, then you can think about it as if light starts bursting out from there and spreading everywhere. But it has to start from somewhere. So the redemption of Jerusalem, the rebuilding of Jerusalem as the capital of God and as the capital of Israel is where it all starts, and from there it spreads out and grows. It's the same idea. We had the metaphor of the tent last time, where the tent expands and then expands more and more. Ezekiel has the idea of Jerusalem expanding more and more. From there, it really grows out to a point where the light spreads everywhere. So we have this principle repeating itself multiple times, and Jerusalem is the center of all of it. Now, a very interesting thing is that we have here motifs, and we had this earlier as well, motifs of rebuilding Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple with amazing stones and so on. And these ideas and God dwelling in it, we actually have similar motifs that can be found in the ancient Near East of a central temple. A lot of cultures had this idea of centralization of one place. This is why the idea of the Tower of Babylon is actually founded in some ideology in the ancient Near East, where we even find one of the emperors. He tried to build a major city. I mentioned this. Sargon II. He actually called the city Dur Sulchin, or city of the dwelling place of Sargon. By the way, the name Sargon is really a Hebraized form of a name which was really more Surchin. His name was a little different. It's not uncommon for that to happen. We all know him as Sargon. And he wanted everyone to speak one language in one city and so on. So there's this idea of centralization. So Jerusalem being the center of everything wouldn't be something foreign to everyone else. If a prophet in Jerusalem says to the nations, there'll be one city, they'll identify that idea. It would speak to them. And that's really what's important here, that we need to understand the Bible is speaking in the language of men and is focusing on things that people would understand the same way that today, for example, a teacher or a preacher or what have you has to relate to the current culture and can't just talk in archaic terminology. So it becomes a necessity to focus on these different things. Now, the prophecy itself starts with the idea of light. So it says, Kumi ori kiva orech uchvod Adonai alayich zarach. So it talks about arise and awaken. Ori is to glow, but also in the way it's described here is also to awaken. He's calling Jerusalem to awaken, but there's also you yourself will glow because your light has arrived. And who is the light? The glory of God. Kevod Adonai. So what is the kavod here? The kavod is actually a well-known Mesopotamian principle known as the melamu. And melamu is a term they would use to talk about the radiance of light from a god. So he says, how do you know God is present? There's a light. If you think, for example, about the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke, I actually once read a commentary that said that really it's always one pillar. But during the day you only see the smoke, and during the night the light of the fire glows out of the smoke, and therefore it looks like as if there's only a pillar of fire in front of you because it's so bright. But someone made a comment, I can't remember exactly who it was, because you read a lot of things throughout time and take notes of everything. But one of the commentaries I read actually suggested the possibility that the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke were really one, and the smoke around the fire was actually hiding the glory of God, or a very powerful presence, and that presence would glow. So at night, when the sun goes down, the light would shine somewhat through it and make it look like as if there's fire. And that's really, it's an idea, because everyone talks about, some historians try to say, this was really just tactical things where they were walking around with posts that have fire in them, or these posts that have a torch on top, and during the day you see the smoke from a distance, and during the night you see the light. But if they were actually one and the same, then at some time you see the light, at some times you see a smoke, but the idea is that the light came out from the smoke. So they didn't really see just a light. They were able to see the flickering of the smoke as well at the same time. And this is also a pillar. It doesn't describe it as being a pole with fire in it. It actually talks about amud. And amud is not always necessarily just a pole, because a pole can also be a nes, especially if it's being used as a signal. But he says it's the glory of God that brings the light. It's like the moon, the sun. God is the sun. Just use as a metaphor. He is the source of the light, and then Jerusalem reflects that because God has returned to her. He says, you have the light, but then he says in verse 2, for darkness will cover the land, and arafel is really a cloud. It's the word araf, which is basically means a cloud in Ugaritic with a suffix lamed, and it means a cloud, which can represent, there's always this metaphor of cloud and darkness, will cover nations. However, the vav here, it says and, or it really means ve'alaych, is the opposite of that. It says ve'alaych yizrach Adonai uchvodo alayich yira'eh. But upon you, the Lord will shine, and His glory, His honor will be seen upon you. People were able to see this glow. you will become a reflection of God's presence by seeing this glow. It's almost like when Moshe came down from Mount Sinai, he had a glow on his face because he was exposed to the presence of God. Jerusalem will go through the same thing. A glow will resonate from Jerusalem because of the presence of God. And he says, as a result of that, it says, the nations will walk to your light, and kings to the glow. Nogah is a glow, is a pleasant light even. The glow of your shining. And he says to her, now they're all gathering together, he says, lift up your eyes. So there's always a common thing of lifting up and using the eyes. It's a very, very common, how you call it, it's a common couple of words. So always lifting up the eyes and seeing. And seek, everyone has gathered to you. Your sons are going to be brought from a distance, or will come from a distance, and your daughters will be carried on the side. So this is actually quite a common metaphor that we find in other cultures as well, where you see people being carried. There's actually, if I'm not mistaken, there's a prophetic text from Assyria that Popula actually brings in the book called Assyrian Prophecies, and he mentions this idea of your daughters will be carried on the side. It's a prophecy to Ashurbanipal, and it says to him, I will carry you on my hip like a wet nurse. So it's very, very similar, because te'amana is really from the word omenet, which is a wet nurse. So we see these metaphors resonating everywhere, and people would know these because these are known terms. It says, and then you will see and you expand. Okay? V'nahalt. Now what's very interesting about the word nahal here is that if you just take it face value, the most common form of the root nahal, and this is a case like I mentioned earlier, means a river, but this doesn't mean river. Here, it's from the root nahal, to glow. So you can see that you can actually use the same root and still have a different meaning. So v'nahalt means that it's like when a person is happy, so there's if a glow in their face. It's not really a physical glow, though he is talking about that there will be a physical glow. We assume if we can compare this to Moshe. So he says, Venahalt, your face will change, your appearance will change and have a glow of joy. Ufachad v'rachav levavech, and you will fear, but really pachad here, pachad really means, it most times means fear, but here has to do with the expansion of the heart, more from excitement. So again, not taking a root just for its face value, but actually referencing a root into its context. So your heart will pound like as if you're in fear, but it's really referring to the idea of the heart pounding out of joy and excitement. And your heart would expand. There's a feeling as if the heart is growing. It says, Ki yafech alayich hamon yam, chel goim yavou lach. For to you will turn, actually means that they will be given to you. So again, the root hafach, there's a lot of these cases in this verse. Hafach here really means that it will be given to you. Hafach usually means to turn over. And here you maybe can play around with the idea of turning over something to someone. But here he's really saying it will be reversed. The nations have all the wealth will be given to you. But he says hamon yam. The word hamon most of the time is used to indicate the idea of a multitude of something. But here the context really probably means hamon in the sense of the riches. And we actually have in Ezekiel, he mentions, I think it's Ezekiel 29 verse 19, he says, Hini noten Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel et Mitzrayim. Behold, I give to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the land of Egypt, v'nasa hamona ushalal shelala. He will carry its either multitude, but here it appears together with the idea of the bounty, and therefore many understand this as being that this is a bounty, that the word hamon sometimes just means a bounty. Now you can say that maybe hamon still means a multitude of people, the multitude of the sea, But then he says, Chel goim yavo lach. Chel is already a very clear reference to the idea of physical items that you give, gifts that you can give, because chel really means the deeds of something. I wrote a short article about the term eshet chayil, and the reason an eshet can be a chayil is not just she's a warrior or she's some kind of fence, because these are some of the common uses of the word chayil. She is actually a possession, a glory, an important, a treasured possession to the husband. So here, chel goim, the possessions of the nations, will be brought to you. And he carries on with this idea. Verse 6, Shifat gemalim techasech, the dust of the camels will cover you. Bechre midyan ve'efa. Bechre is another form of camels, another word for camels from Midian and a place called Efa. Kulam mesheva yavol, they will all come from the city, from the land of Shiva. Shiva is really in the south, it's in Arabia. It's identified as being in Arabia. That's why the discussions about Queen of Sheba being from Ethiopia is really actually incorrect. In truth, some research that I've seen indicates that she was the queen of an Arabian country, a very wealthy Arabian country, but they had links to Ethiopia. There was actually some excavation that I've seen which shows that in Ethiopia they find the same style in Arabia, but the Arabia is older. It's the same style, same decorations, so apparently it was imported to Ethiopia. So Queen of Shiva was not an Ethiopian, she was an Arabian queen, but Ethiopia was part of the Horn of Africa and overall had very strong connections to the ancient Near East. In a research that I did about Ethiopia, it's very evident that the Ethiopians were very active in the army. Some of them even reached the land of Israel, so there were blacks living in the land of Israel, and some of them probably even joined the Israelites. But the connection to Shiva is really through Arabia. And it says, Zahav ulvona isal, they will carry gold and frankincense. Yeah, frankincense. Levona is frankincense. I had to stop for a second there because mor and levona, but mor is myrrh. So it's the same word. Utilat Adonai Vaser, and the praise of the Lord they will announce, because they will know, they will come to Jerusalem and they will know, and they will vocalize it, and they will also take it back to their own land. It says, Kol tzon kedarik betzulach, all the flocks of Kedar. Kedar is another, they were famous for their black tents. These were basically nomads. They will gather to you. So it's very common for nomads to also be shepherds. Ele nevayot ishartunech, the rams of Nevayot, of Nevo, that's really in the Moabite lands, will be served to you. Really what he's talking about, sacrifices. The flocks of Kedar and the rams of Nevo will be given to you. Ya'alu al ratzon mizbechi, they will raise up for favor on my altar. Really in Hebrew it says al ratzon instead of Ya'alu le ratzon al mizbechi. There's quite a few commentators make a point that this is a little bit of a difficult statement in Hebrew, and therefore you have to move some of the words, especially al and ratzon should be reversed. Ya'alu le ratzon, ya'alu ratzon, they will raise up as a burnt offering. Ya'alu comes from the word, same word as olah, will be offered on my altars as something pleasing. Uveti farti afa'er, and my house of glory, I will glorify. It's interesting he uses the same root instead of switching something. It's not uncommon to use the same root to create emphasis. It says, Mi ele ke'av ta'ufena uchayonim el arubotem. Who are these, like a cloud who flies, and like pigeons who fly to their holes, basically the holes that they hide in. So he's talking about all these people showing up, all these nations, all these people, all the sons of Jerusalem showing up, gathering together. Okay, like a cloud that moves very swiftly, like birds who move very quickly to hide. The focus here is really the swiftness, the speed of things happening. And the speed becomes very important, especially in the last statement here. It says, Kili im yekavu, for islands, maybe nations. Okay, some people actually say that the Kili really should be, it's broken up accidentally, and should be Kele, which refers to types of boats. And some have made a comment that the idea here of boats reflects, why is it referred to vessels, kelim, as vessels. So these are the vessels of the islands. They will gather, yekavus, and root kava. So root kava can mean hope, also can mean to gather water into one place. So he is using the metaphor of gathering of water to one place in reference to boats who serve nations who live in islands. Ve'onyot Tarshish beroshana, and the boats of Tarshish and their heads. The boats of Tarshish are leading them, or the head of the caravan. Now, the identification of Tarshish is an interesting one. There's about 3 different identifications, but they're all in Mediterranean area, because some people want to argue that King Solomon went all the way to America. It's very doubtful. Though there's some, for example, there's a very famous stone that has the 10 Commandments on it. I've actually examined some images of the stone. It's a mishmash. I don't know if this is an authentic stone its inscription would date back to the time of King Solomon. In times of King Solomon, we have some examples of what the calligraphy looked like. It's a little bit different, and that little difference can mean a lot, and it is possible it's a forgery. It's a very, very strange stone, but there really is no evidence they went all the way to the Americas, because the identification of Tarshish and Ophir, these are all places which you can actually travel with boat and not go too far. It's also important to point out that deep ocean travel was unknown until much, hundreds of years later. It was actually the Punics, I think, if I remember correctly, who actually caused a lot of trouble to the Romans, who worked as pirates, and they figured out how to navigate with the stars. It was unknown prior to that. Most boats had to travel with eye distance from, or basically eye shot of land, so they don't get lost. This is just fact. We know this is fact. So the identification of these places, some identified as being Tarsus or Tarsa in Kilkilia, Kilikia, which is again near Greece. Some identified as Sardinia, which is a very, very famous island off of the mainland of Greece. And some people say it's Tartassos, which is part of one of the islands off of the Iberian island, basically what we call Spain and Portugal today, and parts of southern France. So these are very distant places. So he's using this because these lands are the most distant lands that they knew of. They're beyond the ocean. Traveling by land would take months upon months. Through the ocean would take less time. But these are some of the most distant places they knew of at the time. So even from that distance, they'll come over. This is how far the information will be. This is how important, from everywhere, as far as they knew, from the most distant places on the face of the earth, people will gather together. To bring your sons from a distance. And there's gold, their silver and gold with them. For the name, for the honor, basically, of the Lord your God. And to the Holy One of Israel, for he is your glory and has caused you glory and has made you glorious. Kedosh Yisrael, if I'm not mistaken, is also mentioned in the previous reading, so this can be also a link to the previous one. It says, Uvanuvne nechar chomotayich, and foreign sons, ben nechar, really the term nechar is the term used in the Bible to indicate nechar or zar. Zar is in the terminology of Leviticus, someone who is not an Israelite, but even zar really means someone who is strange to the temple, which means not a Kohen. But here nechar, nochri, is really the term used more commonly, because a goy really means nation. I always hear this discussion about a goy or goyim or something, but actually it's incorrect. It's a very, very late use of the word. In biblical Hebrew, it's really nechal, which really means something which is foreign, away from our land. So the sons of nechal, the sons of the foreign lands, will build your walls, umalchehem yeshartunech, and their kings will serve you. This verse 10 connects to the previous reading. For with my foaming, my anger, I have struck you, and with my will, my love and compassion, I have showed you mercy and compassion. Ufatchu she'arayich tamid, and your gates will always be open. Tamid means always, continuously. something on a regular basis, because usually he closed the walls of the city at night, but now everything is peaceful and everyone honors Jerusalem, and therefore there's no need to protect the city. There's no need to close the gates at all. Yomam v'layla lo yisageru, day and night they will not be closed. Lavi elaych chel goim, to bring you the deeds, the possessions of nations. Umalchehem nehugim, and their kings are either, there's two possibilities. Nehugim here is a ooh, it's a good question. I have to check the verbal form to make a point here, so if you give me a second. It's all right. Three, two, one. And the kings are nehugim, which means that this is what we call an active form, a kal active form. Actually, nehugim can be either active or passive. There's a bit of a debate in the commentary, but if we take it as a passive, so they are being, they're being chauffeured. They're riding their camels, they're riding their animals, and someone is pulling the animal forward, or they're being carried. But also might be that they are nehugim in the sense that they're the ones leading everyone. And we've seen this motif of the kings showing up earlier. And he says, it says here, ki hagoy v'mamlacha. Now this is very interesting. This verse 12 resembles the description that we have in the book of Zechariah about Sukkot, where he says that a nation that won't show up, they won't have rain, and Egypt will be cursed with something else, because Egypt doesn't base itself on rain. It actually uses the tides of the Nile and the floodings, and therefore they have a different punishment. But he says here something very similar. He says, Ki hagoy v'hamamlacha shelo ya'avduch yovedu. For the nation and the kingdom which will not serve you will perish. V'agoim charov yecherav, when the nations will be surely destroyed. Charav here means to destroy, to be dried out as well. So if we actually use this idea that charav can also mean not just to be destroyed, but chorev in the sense of something which is dried out, maybe there's a bit of a hint here to the prophecy there about rain. Is it possible that maybe they're talking about the same reality? It's quite possible, because they're both taking visions of the future. So there's maybe a correlation here between Isaiah 60 and the book of Zechariah. If I remember correctly, it's Zechariah 14. Again, I'm not very good with the chapters because we never really studied based on the chapters. But Zechariah does mention this idea, a very, very similar idea. And I'm going to skip there, so you can hear the pages flip as well. So he says here in chapter 14, he says in verse 17, Vayasher lo ya'aleh me'et mishpachot ha'aretz el Yerushalayim. It will be that for those who will not go up from the nations of the land to Jerusalem, lishtachavot lamelech Adonai Tzavaot, to bow down to the King, Lord of Hosts, velo alehem yiheh gashem, and not upon them will be the rain. Basically saying they will not receive any rain. ומשפחת מצרים לא תעלה, ולא בא ולא עליהם. And if the nation of Egypt, the family of Egypt, will not go up, and will not enter, will not show, or will not come, and not upon them, תהיה מגפה, ולא עליהם. It's a bit of an interesting discussion. What does it mean, ולא עליהם? But some people, there's some versions that actually remove the law, and says va'alehem, and then you have to move the stop to תהיה המגפה שיגוף אדוני את הגויים. And upon them will be the plague which the Lord will plague the nations. So either rain or maybe something, maybe a drought. They don't need rain, but the Nile will not fill up, which means the blue Lake Victoria, the Blue Nile, they'll dry out because of, well, actually, if you dry out Lake Victoria, then you also dry out parts of Ethiopia. That would be collective punishment. But again, have to remember that sometimes Ethiopia was a little bit part of Egypt as well. In truth, Ethiopia was under Egyptian control until 1957, if I'm not mistaken, because the Ethiopian Archbishop, the Ethiopian Pope, basically, of the Monophysite Church or Tawahido Church of Ethiopia, was appointed by the Church of Egypt, and in 1957, Haile Selassie was able to remove that. But for many years, I mean, because the head of the Ethiopian Church from the from the 4th century was actually appointed by the Alexandrian Church, which is where the center of Christianity in Ethiopia was, not Cairo. Cairo was established as a capital much later, but Alexandria was the real center for a very long time. So maybe by drying out Ethiopia, because maybe he's looking at the fact that Ethiopia is also part of Egypt. But in any case, Charov Yecharavu, the root Charav, doesn't always mean just destroy, but it can also mean to dry out for something which is dry. So maybe it's relating to that. And now he moves a little closer to the area, and he says, Kevod halevanon elayich yavo. The glory of Lebanon will come to you. And what is the glory of Lebanon? The trees. Actually, I just read an article that says, unfortunately, the trees of the cedar of Lebanon is slowly dying out. They're actually been trying to reestablish the presence of the cedar of Lebanon, but apparently because of drought, and we've been suffering a drought for a couple of years now, but there have been some really severe situations in Lebanon. The cedar of Lebanon is dying out, which is actually really sad. Even though Lebanon is an enemy state to Israel, it's still sad. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to remember the Lebanese, before they were Arabized, were basically Phoenicians. Studies that were done on the genetics of Lebanon shows that they were Phoenicians. Phoenicians for a very long time, 90% of them are Phoenicians, they're not Arabs. For many years, the Phoenicians and the Israelites worked together, especially during the times of King Solomon. The cedar of Lebanon was used to build the temple. So the cedar of Lebanon has a very deep importance to us as a people, and for those who believe in the God of Israel, who are not from the seed of Israel, but still believe in the God of Israel, it has great importance, because it will be amazing to rebuild the temple with cedar of Lebanon, because it's one of the most amazing trees out there. I would love to see oak as well, and so on. But the cedar of Lebanon has a great symbolic meaning to us. So hearing this was very distressing. But if he says that this will be brought as part of the glory of Lebanon to Jerusalem, then I would say then we have hope. It will come back, and this damage will be reversed. So he says to her, "Berosh tidhar v'ta'ashur yachdav." So Berosh is the cedar. Tidhar and Ta'ashur, there's some discussions about how to identify these. As I've said, I prefer not to go into the speculations of what each one of these is. But he says all these types of wood, these important types of wood, would show up and will be brought together, yachdav, together. Lefa'er mekom mikdashi, to glorify the place of my temple, u'mekom raglai achabed, in the place of my feet I will honor. And he actually says, Hashamayim kisi v'ha'aretz adom raglai. God says, the heavens is my throne, and the earth is the pedestal of my feet. And really, the Jerusalem, the temple, is where the feet of God stand. And it was actually, the metaphor is not completely disconnected from things he used to do in the ancient Near East. So, for example, some temples, and especially I think the one at Baalbek, actually has these gigantic feet at the entrance of the temple to symbolize that the God has entered the temple. So God's feet being there was sometimes actually presented as something physical. The temple Baalbek, by the way, is a very important site. If you've never read about it, it's worth reading about it. It has some elements that really strongly resemble the Temple of Jerusalem. We know that King Solomon built what we call a Syrian temple, which has a straight line axis. Basically, everything is in one straight line. Some temples had a 90-degree axis where the Holy of Holies will be put to the side. Here the line is straight. There's a lot of really interesting things there. So the whole idea of the feet is in some places wasn't even metaphorical. They would draw feet, very, very large feet. It says, "V'halchu elayich shachoach b'nei me'anayich," and will walk to you, bow down, the sons of the ones who tortured you. V'ishtachavu al kapot raglayich, and they will bow down to your feet. The idea of the feet and having the feet in front of a nation, and then bowing down to it. There's a statue of an Egyptian pharaoh that you can actually see the feet, and the feet are stepping on the names of nations who rebelled. So he's referring to something very, very similar to this. V'kar'u ir Adonai, they will refer to you as the Lord, the city of the Lord. Zion Kedosh Israel, Zion, the Holy One of Israel. However, there's a bit of an issue here. Yeah. I'm going to restart verse 14. 3, 2, 1. And he says, "V'alchu elayich shachoach b'nei me'anayich," and walk before you, bow down, lowered, very lowered, the sons of your torturers. V'ishtachavu al kapot raglayich kol mena'atzayich, and they will bow down to your feet, all the ones who spurned you. So this is the idea of the feet again, the feet of God, now the feet of Jerusalem, Jerusalem being the footstool, but then also it having feet. And there's an interesting statue in the I think it's the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem, where you can see a pharaoh with his feet, and under the feet you can see names of nations that he defeated. So there's a very similar idea here being presented. And he says, "V'kar'u lach ir Adonai Zion Kedosh Yisrael," they call you the city of the Lord, Zion, Zion Kedosh Yisrael, Zion, the Holy One of Israel. It's a bit of an interesting way how this is phrased, but calling Jerusalem Zion as being something that is marked, and maybe the marked one by the God of Israel, the Holy One of Israel, or something in that area. The Zion of the Lord of Israel, of the Holy One of Israel. There's some different interpretations how to actually refer to the Hebrew. And he says, and he's talking about the reversal. The talion, you were like the reverse talion. You were like this, now you're going to be like this. And he says to her, those who don't know what talion is, a talion law is an equality law. If one thing happens, then it receives the same, similar and same reaction. Basically like Newton's second law of physics. And the whole idea is that as you have done, that you will receive the same. So here he's talking about reverse. You were in a certain state. Now the opposite of that, you were very, very low. Now you're going to be very, very high. It says, under, in the stead of you being abandoned, hated, and no one passes by you, in the sense that azuva is abandoned. Senua resembles a bit the idea of a hated wife, a wife that the husband doesn't want to be in contact with. And no one passes, no one goes to see the city, no one passes by to give her condolence. Will place you to the glory, to the fame of the world. Gaon today really means, can also mean someone who's a genius, and therefore someone has fame. But here it really is in the sense of, I will place you to be the thing which is above everyone. Everyone knows of you, but an eternal one. Everyone, no longer you'll be in this state. Everyone will be honoring you, and everyone is going to be remembering you, because you were abandoned and forgotten. Now everyone will remember you. Mesos dol vadol, the glorification of each and every generation. Everyone's going to glorify you with the word masos. And this connects us to the next reading from Sos Asis. V'yanakt chalev goim, v'shod melachim tinaki, and you will suckle the milk of nations. Milk really is a metaphor for fertility and having everything that you need, everything that you want. V'shod melachim tinaki, shod really is probably an incorrect. Shod is related to the word shad, which means a breast. You will suckle on the breast of kings, which means you're going to receive all the goodness in the world, everything possible in the face of the world, everything that is good and nourishing and glorifying and make you stronger. Ve'yadat ki ani Adonai moshiech ve'go'alech avir Yaakov. and he will know that I am the Lord, your Redeemer. Moshiach is not always necessarily just something just physical. Something spiritual. It's also something physical. Your Redeemer and your Goel. Again, we've seen these words before. This is the relative who saves, who protects, who maintains your property, who maintains your family name. Avir Yaakov, the strong one of Jacob. Now, we spoke about the word Avir Yaakov earlier. We have the word Abir, which is usually referring to oxen, strong oxen. Here it appears as Avir to separate from the word Abir, and here it means the mighty one of Jacob. It says, Tachata nechoshet avi zahav. Instead of the copper, I will bring gold, elevating everything. V'tachata barzel avi chesef. And under the iron, I will bring silver. Iron, by the way, back then was a very, very important metal. He made weapons out of it. But he says, for the fortifications of the city, for the gates, because many gates were made out of wood with metal or with iron or bronze bars or lacing on top and so on. He says, now I'm going to bring gold and silver. Now everything is about your glory. Instead of the wood, I will bring copper. Make the gates out of copper with gold and silver linings. Instead of the stones, I will bring iron. There's actually this kind of is the opposite of the iron wall that got placed between Israel. This is in Ezekiel, between Israel and God. Now the walls become morphed to decorate, but it shows the power and the protection. V'samti pekudatech shalom v'nogesaich tzedakah. I will place pekudatech. Pekudatech are the ones who are the supervisors. The word pakad really means one who supervises and responds in proper manner to each situation. So pekudatech is more of the abstract form, not the verb, but more of an abstract sense of the idea. But it really relates to the ones who are in charge of you. And the ones, the noges is really the one who's in charge of finances. It's usually a debt collector or someone who will have debt too. But he says these people, even these wicked people, usually a noges is a person who uses force to collect or uses force to force labor and so on. Both of these people are going to bring peace and righteousness. Even those horrible positions, these people that usually were enemies of the poor, they're actually going to be people of justice. So even the lowest level are actually going to be very, very high up. It says, "Lo yishama od Hamas be'aratzech, shod v'shever b'gvulayach." They will no longer hear Hamas. Hamas is violence in your land. From the fact that there's not going to be war anymore, no enemies coming from the outside. And also inside, people are not going to struggle with one another. Shod v'shever. Shod v'shever is really what we call a henditis. It's means a state of disaster. Shod literally means theft, and shever means breaking, which relates to violence. But shod v'shever means something horrific in your borders. V'karat yeshuacho motayich u'sha'arayich tiran. You will call your walls salvation, and your gates you will call glory. Now, the idea here is more about that the walls will be a symbol of God's protection. So they'll call the walls, they'll probably even name the walls Yeshua and call the gates Tehillah, because they represent God's presence and they represent God's protection. And he says, Lo yerach od hashemesh le'or yomam, the sun will no longer be for light during the day. Ulnoga hayarech lo ye'ir lach, and for glow the moon will not shine for you. Vayalach Adonai le'or olam, the Lord will be an eternal light to you. Ve'elohayich letifartech, and your God to your glory. Now the idea of metaphors of God being the light, we've seen this already in this reading, but he's making a point that God's protection is going to be there all the time. Light represents order, represents protection, represents the time of the day, what we'll call the time of the 24-hour period, where there's light in a way that we can see what's going on. We don't fear when there's light. So the whole idea is God's presence is going to be felt through the light. God's protection is going to be there all the time. And you have to remember, this is being said after a period where Jerusalem and Judea and the entire land was desolate, not completely desolate, but in great destruction. in great distress. There was no protection. There was no king in the land to protect. So now he's saying all those protections that you had so far, which were not permanent, from now on God, who is an eternal, is going to be your protector, and therefore your protection is going to be eternal. He says here in verse 20, Lo yavo od shimshech ve'elchech lo yasef. Your son will no longer enter, meaning it will not set anymore. Ve'elchech lo yasef, and your moon will not be taken away. This also, by the way, might be a metaphor to the idea of the king. You know, we have the prince in the book of Ezekiel, the king who is going to be the representative of God in Jerusalem. He's the sun, and the queen is the moon. Maybe that might be the idea. Will no longer vanish. The moon will not be gathered. The moon will not set either. Ki Adonai yelach leor olam, for the Lord will be for you an eternal light. Veshalmu yemei avlech, and your days of mourning will be completed. Usually, mourning only has a fixed time. It's like the whole idea that you hear from people. Life is a long series of torment with glimpses of happiness. But really what he's saying here is life is one long happiness with glimpses of sadness. Yes, life is a tragedy. Everyone understands there's a lot of tragedy in life, but it's not permanent. If we push ourselves, we can make things better. And God says eventually when he intervenes, then the sorrow is going to completely be gone, and we'll see really how everything does have hope, everything does have happiness, and the sadness is only temporary. And this is what he says, you'll complete. Mourning only lasts a certain amount of time. Then you go back to life, and life continues. It says, V'amech kulam tzadikim le'olam yirshu aretz, and your people, your nation, are all righteous, and they will inherit the land. This wickedness that was there all the time, all this wickedness is going to go away. Mankind will recognize their mistake, and therefore, by doing this and repenting, they will return to the land. He says it's in your hands. Your people will become righteous, and then they can inherit the land. Netzer mata'av ma'aseh yadai litpa'er, the shoot of his planting, his children will be the ones who continue this. The entire people are a shoot, and this kind of reminds me a little bit of the idea of the shoot of David, which is mentioned earlier, but I think it's chapter 7, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I can't remember exactly. A shoot will come out from the stem of Jesse, and he says, but all of Israel are really going to be like David. They're going to be loyal to God like David, and they will be the deeds of my hands. God says, these my people are the deeds of my hands, and they are my glory. They are the thing that honors me, because they can see how the deeds of my hands are perfect now in their ways. And he says, Hakaton yeh le'elef, the youngest, the smallest, the weakest family will be like thousands, will be of greatness. Vatzair legoy atzum, and the young one, again, the lower one of the people, will be like a great nation, a great power. And he says, Ani Adonai be'ita achishena, I am the Lord, when it's time for it to come, I will speed it up. This will happen instantaneously. By the way, the last segment here of the verse, Ani Adonai be'ita achishena, is subject to a lot of interpretation. 3, 2, 1. Is subject to a lot of interpretation in rabbinic literature, where it says when it's either that it appears that it's time or I speed it up. But really, be'ita achishena really works in the idea of not separating the two words to two different things, but really reading them as one. When the time comes, it's going to happen suddenly. When it's time for it to happen, you'll see it, and then there'll be no doubt. And it's very important to make that statement, because there's always going to be the naysayers. There's always going to be the skeptics who say, oh, I'm not really sure if this is it. And God says there won't be any doubt. But we also have to remember the words of Haggai, where Haggai says, it's up to you. We have to trust God, and then he will also react, because what he's waiting for is for us to say, we trust you. Now, trust, as I've mentioned before in other recordings, is a very, very difficult thing. But God says here, it's not just about hope, it's about trusting me and knowing that I will be there, because I have proven, this is the principle of Emunah, I have proven that I am capable, and therefore you need to trust me. So I hope you've enjoyed this recording. As I've always said, share it with your friends, either through the website or Facebook. Tell your friends about these recordings. It's also on iTunes and being pod, I think it's called. Again, I don't manage that part, that part of this of how my work works. But in case, enjoy these words, listen to them, read them out to your family and friends, give each other hope. We strengthen one another by showing that we have the ability to show compassion to one another, and to hope is a very, very, very important thing. Kol Tov.